welfare standards. That will then be debated by Parliament, and through the CRAG process, if Parliament is not happy, Parliament will be able to not ratify that deal. I don't think that will be the eventuality, because I think people will recognise it's a benefit to the UK economy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From what I've seen of this deal so far, it's a great deal, and I think the Secretary of State is to be congratulated on securing it. It's coming out of Brexit, it's going to do much. However, I note that the deal now goes to the Japanese Parliament, has been said, pre-signing approval, but not by law to this Parliament for pre-signing approval. Will my right honourable friend not acknowledge, preferably in the trade bill going through the other place at the moment, that post-Brexit, the UK needs a modern, relevant, fair and workable scrutiny regime for new FTAs, and not just a return to the pre-EU outdated 1924 Ponsonby rule that's restricted to ratification?
Well, I understand that the deal will go to both parliaments at the same time. So it will go to the Japanese Diet at the same time as it goes to the International Trade Committee in this House for their analysis of the deal. And as I've said, under the CRAG process, which was introduced by the Labour government in 2010, Parliament has the ability to block the deal if it doesn't like it, which is roughly equivalent to the process in other parliaments such as Canada, Australia and New Zealand.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I note what the Secretary of State said about impact assessments. But can I ask her what discussions she's had with the OBR and whether the OBR will be producing a forecast of the impact of this deal, and specifically comparing it to WTO trading conditions and what would have happened if we just rolled over the EU-Japan deal?
Okay. Secretary Truss.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. I am committed to making sure that we have independently audited analysis of the deal we complete. But she has highlighted a hypothetical situation. We are now in a world where we've left the EU, even though some of the people on the opposite benches don't seem to want to acknowledge that. And what we have to talk about is what are the benefits of signing this deal versus not signing it.
Heading to Bexley-Heath with Sir David Avenant. Sir David.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I warmly welcome my right honourable friend's statement today and congratulate her on this agreement, which is really good news. Can she explain how SMEs will benefit from this excellent deal, as they are the backbone of our British economy?
Secretary Truss.
Well, the deal with Japan has a dedicated SME chapter. That's all about reducing red tape that SMEs face, making it easier for UK SMEs and Japanese SMEs to understand the other's markets, providing information so it's easier for them to export and gain the benefits that they can from international trade.
Heading up to Edinburgh with Christine Jardine. Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for prior sight of her statement. And yes, we would also welcome the trade deal, but I have two serious concerns with it. One, that it seems to simply mirror what we have with the EU, and apart from still the symbolic wins on things like Stilton cheese, the government has failed to leverage any real meaningful benefits. And since this deal has stricter state aid regulations than the disputed ones in the EU proposals, I mean, does the government actually have a trade strategy?
Secretary Truss.
Well, I'd urge the Honourable Lady to look beyond the EU. 90% of global growth is coming from beyond the EU. And both Japan and the wider Pacific region, which is a fast-growing area, are vitally important for Britain's future economy. Of course we want a deal with the EU, but that shouldn't stop us doing advantageous deals with fast-growing parts of the world, and also working with allies to put forward the cause of free and fair trade.
Just 12 members will be running this to 1637. John Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I too add my congratulations to my right honourable friend for this trade deal. I wonder whether she would like to say a few more words about how the South East will develop, how the South East will benefit from this, because it's not just financial services there. She will be aware that both the increase in exports and imports that we've seen over the recent years has been in road transport.
Secretary Truss.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. In fact, we have achieved improvements in areas like transportation services as well as financial services in the trade deal, and also improved professional and business mobility, making it easier for business people to travel between Japan and the United Kingdom, increasing our economic links. So I think that will be particularly helpful for the South East of England.
Heading to the member report for Huddersfield with Barry Sherman. Barry Sherman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, congratulations to the Secretary of State for any trade deal. But what a week. She's got a deal with for 2% from trade with Japan in a week that we've probably lost the 15.5% deal we might have had with the United States. And isn't it, Mr. Speaker, shameful on this day when a Japanese company, SoftBank, has sold off one of the jewels in the crown of British technology that she couldn't even bring herself to mention ARM from Cambridge. Isn't that shameful? And won't people in this country be despair about her lack of mentioning it?
Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that was a typically upbeat question from the honourable member for Huddersfield. It is not true that our deal with the United States is not progressing. On the contrary, we're in the middle of a very positive negotiating round where we're currently discussing market access terms.
Steve Double.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate the Secretary of State on securing this deal? And can I say that I am delighted, as the people of Cornwall will be, that the iconic Cornish pasty and Cornish clotted cream is to be protected, along with many other geographically protected British produce. And can my right honourable friend say what further opportunities there will be for Cornish producers to export to Japan as a result of this deal?
Secretary Truss.
Well, my honourable friend is right. There are a number of products in Cornwall, whether it's the Cornish pasty, whether it's West Country farmhouse cheddar, whether it's clotted cream, that are going to benefit from this deal, both by lower tariffs, but also by increased recognition of their geographic indicators. I'm going to be in Cornwall later this week. I hope to talk to the producers about how we can increase their level of exports and take advantage of these new opportunities.
Alan Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to say I find it absurd that this House is being asked to debate a text that has not been published, because on trade deals, really, the devil will be in the detail. So can I pick up on the state aid provisions, because I really am curious about this. In today's FT Financial Times, it's reported that the UK and Japan, I quote, have agreed to replicate the restrictions on subsidies in the EU-Japan deal that went into effect last year. Now, I was involved in that in Brussels in a previous incarnation, and it goes far beyond what the UK is looking for in the UK-EU trade deal. So I listened carefully to the Secretary's response. She said it's a standard state aid clause, which strikes me as bizarre language because there are no standard state aid clauses in any trade deals ever, anywhere. So can I ask, has she actually made that commitment, as reported in the Financial Times? Will she stand by it, or will she retire from it in 6 months' time in a limited way? Or has she dropped the ball?
Secretary Truss.
Well, I do find it extraordinary when I'm appearing here in front of the House to update the House for the honourable gentleman to complain that I haven't given him the next update. The reason I'm here is because every stage we agree with the Japanese. I want to share it with the House. I want to have that debate. And of course, there will be another debate when we have produced the final text, which the honourable gentleman will be able to participate in. Many FTAs have subsidy clauses, but no FTA, apart from the one that the EU is demanding with the UK, actually has one bloc imposing its subsidy regime on another country.
We now come to Ben Everett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think the whole House by now will know of my love of the delivery robots in Milton Keynes, the autonomous delivery robots, who I am assured can deliver geographically protected goods such as Stilton and pork pies, but also they're part of the UK's larger tech industry. Can my right honourable friend update the House on how our tech businesses will be helped by the data and digital parts of this deal?
Secretary of Trust.
Well, what this deal will do is essentially underwrite digital and data flows between the UK and Japan, meaning there aren't requirements like data localisation, that we uphold the principles of net neutrality, that we enable the free flow of data. And what it will mean is brilliant companies like that in my honourable friend's constituencies will be able to sell their products into Japan without hindrance.
Christian Matheson.
Mr. Speaker, further to the question from the honourable gentleman from Stirling, if the FT article is to be is correct, the government has signed up to more restrictive conditions on state aid in this deal than they're being negotiated with the European Union. So will the Secretary of State confirm now that those negotiations with the European Union are all about deterring the EU from reaching a deal so that they will walk away and we can blame them for no deal and not take the hit that would otherwise be aiming to the government?
Secretary of Trust.
I'm not quite clear what the honourable gentleman's question was. It seems to be more of an accusation. But as I've said, the subsidy clauses in the deal are standard FTA clauses. They're nothing like what the EU are demanding of us.
Virginia Crossman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 277 Welsh businesses exported to Japan last year. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that the new tariff reduction in beef represents an exciting opportunity for farmers? Farmers like Brian Bowen, who's actually at a cattle auction this afternoon, chairman of my NFU, and Gerald Thomas, who is president of the FUW.
Secretary of Trust.
Well, British beef and lamb was let back into the Japanese market in 2019. And what we've achieved in this deal is significant tariff reductions on beef and also more protection of geographic indicators such as Welsh lamb and, of course, from her own constituency, Ynys Môn sea salt.
Dr. James Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate my right honourable friend on securing this free trade agreement with Japan. Will she outline the benefits that she sees it bringing to the economy of North East Wales?
Secretary of Trust.
Well, there are huge benefits to the economy of North East Wales, whether that's in digital and data, whether it's in agriculture, such as Welsh lamb, or whether it's in areas like manufacturing, where we've got reduced cost of bringing in car parts and also closer regulatory cooperation between Japan and the UK.
I put a line through him too soon. Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It has been possible to put a line through me. I would have thought that that's by the way. Can I first of all thank the Secretary of State for all she's doing. Her eagerness to get trade deals the world over is very infectious, and I think everyone in this House should be encouraged by that. It is an indication of the fact that the global market is anxious to get sorted with the UK as a trading partners. I know that there are set to be strong tariff reductions for the UK pork and beef exports, with low tariffs for food and drink and more generous quotas for malt in the EU-Japan deal. Will the Secretary of State confirm how this translates for malt for my local whisky producer, Actonville Distillery in Kirkcudbright, and also Bushmills whisky, and for the Northern Ireland pork and beef industries, which proves the best pork and beef in the world, and we have that in Northern Ireland, we have that in my constituency, and can we expect an increase in the market to Japan?
Secretary of State.
Well, we absolutely can expect an increase. As I said, British beef has only just been allowed back into the Japanese market. We're now going to see tariff reductions of significant levels. Northern Ireland's, of course, a very strong exporter of these products and will also benefit from the increased protection of geographic indicators, whether it's the Armagh Bramley apple or indeed the Loch Ness eel.
Stephen King.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State mentioned Nissan, and of course there's an intrinsic link from Nissan into UK steel, and that's intrinsically linked into the talks with the United States. Can the Secretary of State guarantee that President Trump's completely unrealistic and unreasonable Section 232 tariffs on UK steel will be removed from the trade negotiations with the United States as a precondition for those trade negotiations to proceed?
Secretary of Trust.
Well, we are in active negotiations with the United States, and one of the things I've been very clear about is the fact that we need to see those unfair 232 tariffs on our steel removed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Secretary of State please tell me that we are very, very excited in Grimsby about this trade deal, because in particular it will create a huge benefit, we feel, for our family-owned fish processors, particularly Flatfish and our fish smokehouses of Alfred Enderby's. Can the Secretary of State tell me how fisheries will help be improved as part of this bill?
Truss.
Well, there are two benefits for fisheries from this deal. First of all, we're going to see a reduction in tariffs on all kinds of fish, whether it's mackerel, cod or salmon. But my honourable friend will be very pleased to hear that traditional Grimsby smoked fish is one of the geographic indicators we're going to be replicating in Japan.
Heading to Coatbridge with Stephen Bonner. Stephen Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How long will it be until the UK government realises that this Japan deal is not as good as it's been touted, and then U-turn and renege on it? And should my constituents take your word, Secretary, that it won't?
Secretary Truss.
Well, we've already made significant progress achieving agreement in principle. We're working on the legal scrubbing, and I'll be bringing this back to Parliament very soon.
Alan Kearns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I warmly congratulate my right honourable friend and her ministerial team for securing this deal in such quick order. Wales has a long history of attracting inward investment from Japan, with Sony was the first FDI project from Sony that came to Bridgend back in 1973. So will my right honourable friend, however, guarantee that the finest lamb in the world, being Welsh lamb, will have its geographical indicator protected so that we can continue our deep trading relationship with Japan?
Secretary Truss.
Well, my honourable friend is right about the investment in both countries, and what this deal seeks to do is deepen that relationship, that economic relationship in services, in manufacturing, and of course in agriculture. And I'm delighted to say that Welsh lamb is on the list of geographical indicators that should be recognised by Japan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the North East has benefited significantly from Japanese investment. So I welcome the continuation of existing trading relationships which this deal largely represents. But the Secretary of State will know that for Nissan and for investors more generally, and for jobs in the North East, the deal that matters is the oven-ready one with the European Union. So can she set out precisely what the differences are between the state aid provisions in this Japanese deal and those rejected in the European Union deal, apart from the fact that the latter are already in place?
Secretary Truss.
Well, I've recently visited both Hitachi and Nissan, and both of those two companies are pleased by the progress we've made in the Japan deal. And of course, like all of us, they want a deal with the EU, but it has to be the right deal for Britain. My lesson as Trade Secretary is that you have to be prepared to hold out for the right deal.
Tobias Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I join others in congratulating my right honourable friend on securing such an important deal? And could I hope that she goes on to secure future deals in the future for Britain? Could I also encourage her to ensure that this new opportunity is considered in the integrated review, because our economic security and our national security go hand in hand?
Secretary Truss.
Well, my honourable friend is right, and one very important aspect of this deal and our relationship with Japan is, of course, they are a leading free enterprise democracy. And what we need to be doing is working with like-minded countries to protect free trade across the world, but also to make sure trade is fair. And that's one of the huge benefits of joining CPTPP. It is a high standards trade agreement of countries that believe in free trade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the progress that was made in relation to geographically protected indicators, a number of which come from the Northern Isles in relation to this deal. But the Financial Times article to which other members have referred does say that David Frost is concerned that the Secretary of State has given away more in relation to level playing field issues than he is offering to the EU. Now, if that is correct, then that is very serious indeed. Will the Secretary of State commit to publishing the state aid clauses now?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm pleased that the honourable gentleman appreciates the new listing of Orkney beef, Orkney lamb, Orkney Scottish Islands cheddar, and I think we also have a Shetland geographic indicator. Oh, well, I'm sorry to hear the honourable gentleman denigrate foodstuffs from his own constituency. Sorry, I didn't hear you. Sorry. We are still in the legal scrubbing process with Japan. Once that process is finished, that's got nothing to do with wool. Once that process is finished, we will be sharing our text with the Trade Committee, and they will be fully analysing it.
Dean Becker.
Speaker, I congratulate her heartily, and also her Chief Trade Negotiation Advisor, who I think led this particular negotiation, if I recall correctly. I want to welcome the fact that the government has agreed disciplines to avoid anti-competitive market distortions and subsidies in particular. Does she think that we could offer a similar regime to the EU in order to reassure them that we will be behaving fairly as an independent United Kingdom?
Well, we're very committed to behaving fairly in all of our dealings. But as I've made clear earlier, what the EU is asking for is not a standard FTA clause. What they're asking for is for the EU state aid regime to be put into UK law, and that is not on.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our total trade last year with Japan was worth $31 billion. That's hugely important, but to put it in perspective, our total trade last year with the Netherlands was 3 times that amount. While we all welcome this deal, is the Secretary of State concerned that we have not yet secured our continued free trade with the Netherlands and the other 26 EU member states?
Liz Truss.
Well, I don't think 30 billion is to be sniffed at in terms of our trade with Japan. And the Honourable Lady has to look to the future. What we are going to see is the vast majority of global growth coming from outside the EU, and what we want is for the UK to be hitched to those growth opportunities so our businesses can expand. I don't see today as a maximum or a steady state. Of course, we could do more in the future, and what these lower tariffs mean is it will be easier and more economic for our businesses to export to Japan.
Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I first of all congratulate my right honourable friend on this fantastic deal, which demonstrates not just Britain's place in Asia, but Britain's place on the Asian and American continent as part of CPTPP. And I'm delighted that she's joining me and the Japanese Defence Minister in praising the CPTPP and encouraging Britain to play a more active part. Will she also, however, urge the Defence Secretary to bring the Japanese into the Six Eyes, as it will be then?
Well, I'll pass that call on to my colleague, the Defence Secretary. But my honourable friend is absolutely right about the central importance of TPP, not just as a huge economic opportunity for the United Kingdom, but also as a beacon of free trade, a beacon of fair play that will be vitally important as we seek to reform the global trading system.
Mr. Speaker, based on the British government's own best-case scenario figures, am I right in calculating that it will take 71 deals of this nature to make up for what will be lost by pursuing the British government's policy of leaving the EU single market and customs union?
Mr. Speaker, I think some honourable members have got the wrong title of today's statement. They seem to think it's about the EU referendum, which I believed happened 3 years ago.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, 717 businesses across the West Midlands benefited from exporting to Japan. So does she believe that places like Birmingham are going to benefit from this £15 billion boost, which will help create jobs and economic advantages of local people, despite the many protests and the doomsters, gloomsters and doubters opposite who said it would never happen?
Well, my honourable friend makes a very important point. We were previously being told that we wouldn't get a deal with Japan, or we wouldn't get a better deal than the EU had got with Japan. Well, that has shown to be wrong. And the people that are going to benefit are the people of the Midlands and around the country who are going to see their goods being able to export to Japan at a lower price, which means more jobs and more opportunities.
Alex Norris. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Free global trade is a good thing, but it does pose challenges under our climate change obligations. The Secretary of State's committed to an impact assessment. I wonder if she'll also commit to have a chapter in there on the climate impacts and what we're doing to mitigate them to the lowest level possible.
Well, I can assure the honourable gentleman that there are very strong climate change commitments in our agreement with Japan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I echo the sentiments on this side of the House and offer my own personal congratulations to the Secretary of State for a great deal. Can my right honourable friend provide greater detail on how this deal will make it easier for business people to move between the UK and Japan?
Well, I certainly can. What this deal does is it goes beyond the deal the EU had agreed, both in terms of UK business people being able to go to Japan, but also Japanese business people being able to come here. And that is vitally important for industries like financial services, professional services. So, for example, there are increased ability to bring families with people on business visits. There are wider rules about what type of professions qualify. So overall, what this will see is an increase in exchange of that professional people between both countries.
Mr. Speaker, we've already heard from many colleagues about the limitations of scrutiny within this House of this trade deal, but could you tell us what role there will be for the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government in having any input into the deal?
Well, we've been very closely involving the Scottish Government in all our work. In fact, my honourable friend, the Trade Minister, spoke to his Scottish counterpart early today.
Sarah Dines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my right honourable friend knows, it is in fact in the Derbyshire Dales that the best Stilton in the UK is made. Hartington Blue, Dovedale Blue and also other great cheeses like Peakland White. Can my right honourable friend further elucidate on how this agreement will benefit my Stilton producers and other great cheese producers across the UK?
Well, she certainly has a wide array of excellent Stiltons in her constituency. What we have done through this agreement is protect our access to low tariffs for Stilton and also gained a commitment from the Japanese to even wider access when we accede to CPTPP. And overall, for all types of cheese, we are seeing tariffs coming down, which will mean more of our great British product going into the Japanese market.
Chris Brown.
Of course I welcome this, because as Asda would say, every little helps. But I am worried. Oh, is it? It's Morrison's in Porth in the Rhondda. But I am worried about Welsh lamb, because there's a serious issue here, which is that 92.5% of Welsh lamb exports go to the EU, and even at the best estimates of what the government is hoping for, only 3% go to Japan. So if we end up with tariffs on the 92.5% of 38%, we have killed the Welsh lamb industry. Will she really put all the energy she possibly can into getting a good deal for Welsh lamb with the EU as well as with Japan?
Well, of course, Lord Frost is negotiating the EU deal, and I know that is one of his key areas, is making sure we get good access for our agricultural products to the EU market. But I point out to the honourable gentleman that, of course, the US is the second largest importer of lamb in the world. So I hope for his strong support for a US deal, as well as our deal with Japan.
Sean Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, can I congratulate my right honourable friend for securing this deal? And can I ask her what work she's undertaking with local stakeholders, particularly in the Black Country, so that my businesses in Wednesbury, Oldbury and Tipton can truly take advantage of the opportunities presented by this deal?
Well, I thank my honourable friend, and I know the Minister for Trade recently had a webinar with businesses from the Black Country. But of course, as we approach January the 1st, what we want to do is encourage more businesses to get involved in this exciting trade with Japan. It's a huge market. The British brand is very appreciated there, and it's also a gateway to the wider Pacific region.
We're heading to Swansea with Geraint Davis. Geraint Davis.
Mr. Speaker, Margaret Thatcher got Japanese car companies to come to Britain as a platform to export into the single market. As a result of this Japanese deal alongside her expected EU deal, will there be more or fewer cars being exported in the future, Japanese cars, from Britain into the EU?
Secretary Truss.
Well, I'm very pleased to see the honourable member's tribute to our great Prime Minister, Mrs Thatcher. It's a first from him, but I hope it's the first of many. The answer is we want a successful British car industry, and car companies like Nissan are supportive of this deal because it brings extra benefits to the UK.
Jameson.
Mr. Speaker, does my right honourable friend agree that this is an excellent deal for the United Kingdom, that it offers great possibilities for England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and it's just another reason why we're better off together as a union?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. This deal has benefits and opportunities for all of the UK. It's a central part of help levelling up our country, making sure every region and nation has those opportunities, getting jobs and growth in their local area.
In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order. We ready? Okay. Right, we now come to business day. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
United Kingdom Internal Market Bill, second reading.
Now.
I must inform the House that I have selected the amendment in the name of Keir Starmer. I now call the Prime Minister. Prime Minister!
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time and this House act to preserve one of the crucial achievements of the last 3 centuries, namely our British ability to trade freely across the whole of these islands. The creation of our United Kingdom by the Acts of Union of 1707 and 1801 was not simply a political event, but an act of conscious economic integration that laid the foundations for the world's first industrial revolution and the prosperity we enjoy today. When other countries in Europe stayed divided, we joined our fortunes together and allowed the invisible hand of the market to move Cornish pasties to Scotland, Scottish beef to Wales, Welsh beef to England, and Devonshire clotted cream to Northern Ireland or wherever else it might be enjoyed. And when we chose to join the EU back in 1973, we also thereby decided that the EU treaties should serve as the legal guarantor of these freedoms. Now that we've left the EU and the transition period is about to elapse, we need the armature of our law once again to preserve the arrangements on which so many jobs and livelihoods depend. That is the fundamental purpose of this bill, which should be welcomed by everyone who cares about the sovereignty and integrity of our United Kingdom. We shall provide the legal certainty relied upon by every business in our country, including, of course, in Northern Ireland. The manifesto on which this government was elected last year promised business in Northern Ireland, and I quote, unfettered access to the rest of the UK. And I give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
For giving way, and I'm listening carefully to what he's saying. But why then did one of his own distinguished members on the other side describe his policy this week as Nixonian madman theory? Is he not deeply worried that his policies and approach are being compared to those of the disgraced former US President Richard Nixon, rather than someone like Winston Churchill?
I must say to the honourable gentleman that actually I think that this bill is essential for guaranteeing the economic and political integrity of the United Kingdom, and simply sets out to achieve what the people of this country voted for when they supported our election manifesto, and not only unfettered access to from NI to GB, NI, but also, I quote, this was in the manifesto, to maintain and strengthen the integrity and smooth operation of our internal market. Now, I've given way. This bill is designed to honour that pledge and maintain those freedoms. When we renegotiated our withdrawal agreement from the EU, we struck a careful balance to reflect Northern Ireland's integral place in our United Kingdom, while preserving an open border with Ireland, with the express and paramount aim of protecting the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and the peace process. And in good faith, we accepted certain obligations in the Northern Ireland Protocol in order to give our European friends the assurances they sought on the integrity of their single market, while avoiding any change to on the island of Ireland. We agreed to conduct some light-touch processes on goods passing between Great Britain and Northern Ireland in case they were transferred to the EU, and I give way to the honourable gentleman who knows a great deal about this subject.
Prime Minister, thank you for giving way, and this is a very, very important debate, as you know, and I know, and everyone in this House knows. Does the Prime Minister accept that the EU's determination to use Northern Ireland as a stick to beat the UK with its punishment for daring to leave an institution who had no respect or concern for our people has been underlined by the behaviour of MEPs and indeed some in this House, as they seek again against the will of the majority of the people to stop Brexit instead of doing the honourable thing, respecting the vote and the recent general election validation and taking care of the UK and putting our people first, which the Prime Minister said he will do. This legislation is a way of doing that.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the intention of this bill is clearly to stop any such use of the stick against this country, and that's what it does. It's a protection, it's a safety net, it's an insurance policy, and it is a very sensible measure. And in a spirit of reasonableness, we are conducting those checks in accordance with our obligations. We are creating the sanitary and phytosanitary processes required under the protocol and spending hundreds of millions of pounds on helping traders. Under this finely balanced arrangement, our EU friends agreed that Northern Ireland, and this is a crucial point, Northern Ireland would remain part of the customs territory of the United Kingdom, able to benefit from free trade deals with other countries, which we are now beginning to strike, and ensuring that goods not at risk of travelling to the EU, and that is the majority of goods going GB to Northern Ireland, the majority of goods travelling not at risk of travelling to the EU do not have to pay tariffs. But the details of this intricate deal and the obvious tensions between some of its provisions can only be resolved with a basic minimum of common sense and goodwill from all sides. I regret to have to tell the House that in recent months the EU has suggested that it is willing to go to extreme and unreasonable lengths, using the Northern Ireland Protocol in a way that goes well beyond common sense, simply to exert leverage against the UK in our negotiations for a free trade agreement. To take the most glaring example, the EU has said that if we fail to reach an agreement to their satisfaction, they might very well refuse to list the UK's food and agricultural products for sale anywhere in the EU. And it gets even worse, Mr. Speaker, because under this protocol, that decision would create an instant and automatic prohibition on the transfer of our animal products from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. Mr. Speaker, our interlocutors on the other side are holding out the possibility of blockading food and agricultural transports within our own country, and I give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you very much. Would the Prime Minister agree with me that there's no greater obligation for MPs than to our voters, and that the British people were told a no deal is better than a bad deal and we would prosper without a deal? And given that the EU refused to negotiate in good faith, we have no alternative but to legislate and protect our internal markets.
My honourable friend is entirely right, and I have to say that absurd and self-defeating as that action would be, even as we debate this matter, Mr. Speaker, the EU has not taken that particular revolver off the table. And I hope that they will do so, and that we can reach a Canada-style free trade agreement as well. Indeed, it is such an extraordinary threat, and it seems so incredible that the EU could do this, that we are not taking powers in this bill to neutralise that threat, but obviously reserve the right to do so if these threats persist, because I'm afraid these threats reveal the spirit in which some of our friends are currently minded to conduct these negotiations. It goes to what my learned friends would call the intention of some of those involved in the talks. I think the mens rea. I give play to the noble and the learned, my learned, right on the learned colleague.
Never objects to another promotion. I've listened carefully to what the Prime Minister said. Would he accept that were our interlocutors in the EU to behave in such an egregious fashion, which clearly would be objectionable and unacceptable to us, there is already provision under the withdrawal agreement for an arbitrary arrangement to go into case, and that were we to take reserve powers, is it right, does he accept that those reserve powers should only be brought into force as a final backstop if we have in good faith tried to act under the withdrawal agreement and then are then frustrated. The timing upon which they come into force is very important for our reputation as upholders of the rule of law.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right in what he says, and he knows a great deal about this matter. It is of great importance that we go through the legal procedures as we will. But I must say to him, as things stand, there are other avenues, in addition to the potential blockade on agricultural goods, that the EU could explore if they're determined. I'll come to his points in a minute. But there are other avenues that the EU could explore if they're determined to, as I say, to interpret the protocol in absurd ways, and if they fail to negotiate in good faith. And we must now take a package of protective powers in this bill and subsequently. For example, there is the question of tariffs in the Irish Sea. When we signed the protocol, we accepted that goods at risk of going from Great Britain into the EU via Northern Ireland should pay the EU's tariff as they cross the Irish Sea. We accepted that. But that any goods staying within Northern Ireland would not do so. The protocol created a joint committee to identify with the EU which goods were at risk of going into Ireland. This sensible process was one of the achievements of our agreement. And our view is that this forum remains the best way of solving this question. But I'm afraid some in the EU are now relying on legal defaults to argue that every good is at risk and therefore liable for tariffs. And that would mean, Mr. Speaker, tariffs that could get as high as 90% by value on Scottish beef going to Northern Ireland, moving not from Stranraer to Dublin, but from Stranraer to Belfast within our United Kingdom. Tariffs potentially over 61% on Welsh lamb heading from Anglesey to Antrim, and potentially over 100% on clotted cream moving from Torridge, to pick a Devonshire town at random, to Larne. Mr. Speaker, this is unreasonable and plainly against the spirit of that protocol. They are threatening to carve tariff borders across our own country and to divide our own land, and to change the basic facts about the economic geography of the United Kingdom, and egregiously to ride roughshod over their own commitment under Article 4 of the protocol, whereby, and I quote, Northern Ireland is part of the customs territory of the United Kingdom. Mr. Speaker, we cannot have a situation where the very boundaries of our country could be dictated by a foreign power or international organisation. No British Prime Minister, no government, no Parliament could ever accept such an imposition. And I give way to my honourable friend.
How can my right honourable friend ensure that Derbyshire Dales lamb, grown in our country, can be enjoyed by our fellow citizens in Northern Ireland, part of our country?
I thank my honourable friend very much, Mr. Speaker, and the best way that we can all be sure that such lamb is able to be sold throughout the whole United Kingdom is to vote for this bill and to vote to protect the economic integrity of the UK. And to answer the questions that are being shouted at me from a sedentary position, Mr. Speaker, last year we signed the withdrawal agreement in the belief, which I still hold, that the EU would be reasonable. Now, after everything that has recently happened, we must consider the alternative. We ask for reasonableness and common sense and balance, and we still hope to achieve that, Mr. Speaker, through the joint committee process, in which we will always persevere, no matter what the provocation. And I'll give way to my right honourable friend.
Certainly grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way, and I want to ask him, if I may, about the ministerial code. When I was the Attorney General in the previous government, I was happy to confirm that the ministerial code obliged ministers to comply with international as well as domestic law. This bill will give ministers overt authority to break international law. Has the position on the ministerial code changed?
No, not in the least, Mr. Speaker, and he can consult the Attorney General's position on that. And because, after all, what this bill is simply seeking to do, and this is the crucial thing, what we're simply seeking to do is to ensure this country, to protect this country against the EU's proven willingness, and that's the crucial point, to use this delicately balanced protocol in ways for which it was never intended. So this bill includes our first step to protect our country against such a contingency by creating a legal safety net, taking powers in reserve, whereby ministers can guarantee the integrity of our United Kingdom. And I understand how some people will feel unease over the use of these powers, and I share that sentiment myself. And I want to say to my brother and friend, I have absolutely no desire to use these measures. They are an insurance policy. And if we reach agreement with our European friends, which I still believe is possible, they will never be invoked. And of course, it is the case that the passing of this bill does not constitute the exercise of these powers. If they were ever needed, ministers would return to this House with a statutory instrument on which a vote, perhaps that's the question to which he's waiting an answer, Mr. Speaker, on which a vote would be held. And we will simultaneously pursue every possible redress, to get back to the point I was making to my honourable friend, the member for Bromley. We will simultaneously pursue every possible redress under international law, as provided for in the protocol. In addition to our steps in domestic law, we would, if we had to make clear that we believe the EU is engaged in a material breach of its duties of good faith, as required under the Withdrawal Agreement and the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties. We will seek an arbitration panel, as provided for under the Withdrawal Agreement, and consider safeguards under Article 16 of the Protocol. It is not a question of if we meet our obligations, but how we fulfil them. We must do so in a way that satisfies the fundamental purpose of the Protocol, the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and the constitutional position of Northern Ireland. We will work with the EU on all of these issues. And even if we have to use these powers, we will continue to engage with the Joint Committee so that any dispute is resolved as quickly and as amicably as possible, reconciling the integrity of the EU single market with Northern Ireland's place in the UK's customs territory. But what we cannot do now is tolerate a situation where our EU counterparts seriously believe that they have the power to break up our country. And if that is what honourable members want them to have on the other side, then I'm afraid they are grievously mistaken. That illusion must be decently dispatched, and that's why these reserve powers are enshrined in this bill. In addition, Mr. Speaker, this bill will help deliver the single biggest transfer of powers to the devolved administrations since their creation, covering a total of 160 different policy areas. Each devolved administration will also be fully and equally involved in the oversight of the UK's internal market through a new independent body, the Office of the Internal Market. The bill will maintain our common cause of high standards, where we already go beyond the EU in areas ranging from health and safety to consumer and environmental protections. And I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Can I just take the Prime Minister back to the question that was asked by the former Attorney General? Because it seems to me quintessential to the way we do our business that ministers abide by the law. Indeed, the Justice Secretary is required by law to swear that he will uphold the rule of law. How, therefore, can the Prime Minister seriously advance a piece of legislation which says regulations are not to be regarded as unlawful on the grounds of any incompatibility or inconsistency with relevant international or domestic law? That's just gobbledygook, isn't it? Complete and utter nonsense.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't know whether the right honourable gentleman was listening, but I made very clear that we do not relish the prospect of having to use these powers at all. We hope very much, as I said, that the EU will be reasonable. But any democratically elected government of this country, and I would go to say any MP representing the people of this country, must be obliged to do whatever he or she can to uphold the territorial integrity of this country. And that is what we are doing. And furthermore, Mr. Speaker, instead of UK's taxpayers' money under this bill, instead of UK, which is an excellent bill, instead of UK taxpayers' money being dispersed by the EU, it will allow this government to invest billions of pounds across the whole of the UK to level up. Mr. Speaker, a year ago, this Parliament was deadlocked, exasperating the British people by its failure to fulfil their democratic wishes, and, worst of all, by undermining our negotiators, as you will recall, by effectively telling the EU that if they played hardball, this House would oblige them by weakening our country's hand and legally forbid our representatives from walking away from the negotiating table. Mr. Speaker, I hope this House will never make that mistake again. Instead, let us seize the opportunity presented by this bill and send a message of unity and resolve. Let's say together to our European friends that we want a great future relationship and a fantastic free trade deal. And I give way for the pleasure to my honourable friend.
The Prime Minister will remember that we have some history in this regard. And I didn't want us to leave with no agreement last year. And we fell out over that. But he was true to his word, and we had an agreement. Isn't the truth of this that we said in our manifesto we will ensure Northern Ireland's businesses and producers enjoy unfettered access to the rest of the UK? And the way to do that is either through this Internal Markets Bill or by agreeing the free trade agreement with the EU, the Canada-style deal, that they said was on the table, that he then came into office and said, OK, they now seem to have stepped back from that. So can he just assure me, and I thank him for saying that tonight is difficult for some of us, but this is an important piece of legislation, can he assure me that his policy and the policy of his government is still to secure that FTA with the EU that they said they want and that we know that we want?
Can I thank my honourable friend for the spirit in which he asked that question, made that important point, and he is absolutely right to focus on where we are now in our talks on this free trade agreement. And it is by passing this bill tonight and in subsequent days that we will make the possibility of that great free trade agreement more real, and we will get it done sooner. And therefore, with this bill, we will not only expedite a free trade agreement with our European friends and partners, but with friends and partners around the world. We will support jobs and growth throughout the whole of the United Kingdom. We will back our negotiators. By voting for this deal, we will back our negotiators in Brussels. And above all, we will protect the territorial integrity of the UK and the peace process in Northern Ireland. So I urge this House to support this bill and, as my honourable friend rightly says, to get back to the business of securing a free trade agreement with our closest neighbours that we would all wish to see. And, Mr. Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the bill now be read a second time. I call on the Shadow Secretary of State, Ed Miliband, to now move the amendment. Ed Miliband.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the amendment standing in the name of the Leader of the Opposition and other right honourable and honourable friends. Mr. Speaker, there are two questions at the heart of this bill and why we'll be opposing it tonight. First, Madam Deputy Speaker, how do we get an internal market after January the 1st within the UK while upholding the devolution settlements, which have been a vital part of our constitution now for 2 decades and are essential for our union? And secondly, is our country going to abide by the rule of law, a rules-based international order for which we are famous around the world and have always stood up? Madam Deputy Speaker, these are not small questions, but go to the heart of who we are as a country and to the character of this government. Let me start with the first question. An internal market is vital for trade and jobs at home, but also for our ability to strike trade deals. And it is the responsibility of the UK government at Westminster to safeguard that market and legislate. On this, we agree with the government. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, it must be carried out understanding that the governance of our country has changed in the last 2 decades. 2 decades of devolution settlements were a decision that we would share power across our 4 nations, including devolving key powers over issues like animal welfare, food safety, and aspects of environmental legislation. So we should be legislating for an internal market, but in a way that respects the role of devolved governments in having a voice in setting those standards. That is respecting the devolution settlement. And what we've heard from across the UK is that the government is not doing that, that they want to legislate with a blunderbuss approach that does not do that, and simply says the lowest standard in one parliament must become the standard for all, with no proper voice for devolved governments. So if the Westminster government, I'll give way in a moment, if the Westminster government decided to lower standards, there will be no voice for the devolved nations, even in having a discussion about those standards, because they decided not to legislate for common frameworks. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm very grateful to the right honourable member, and I have to say I think he's getting to the nub of this, because, Madam Deputy Speaker, what we have is joint ministerial committees, and huge progress had been made over the course of the last few months in agreeing frameworks that allow us to do exactly what the right honourable member has asked for. Is that not the right way to proceed? Through frameworks in agreement with the devolved administrations, not this race to the bottom that we're going to get with the government's bill?
Say that he and I come from different positions in the following respect. I want to respect the devolution settlements to uphold the union. He has a different point of view. But on this point, we should be legislating for common frameworks. That would be the way to respect devolution. And I'm sorry, and I don't know whether the Prime Minister even understands this legislation, but I'm sorry, I'm sorry that on this issue, I know he's got many things on his plate, but on this issue, the government has been cavalier in its approach. Because actually since 2017, there has been the development of common frameworks, and they could have legislated for that. And that is what we will be seeking to do in the passage of this bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, these issues were prefigured in the White Paper. But since then, we have an even bigger question to confront. Now, let me say right at the outset, we want the smoothest trade across our United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland. There is a way to resolve these issues in the joint committee set up for this purpose. I have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, from a man who said he wanted to get Brexit done and won an election on it, this bill gets Brexit undone by overturning key aspects of the protocol that were agreed. And I do say to the Prime Minister, while I have been part of many issues of contention across this dispatch box, I never thought respecting international law would, in my lifetime, be a matter of disagreement. I stood opposite the Prime Minister's predecessor, David Cameron, as Leader of the Opposition for 5 years. I don't know why he's rolling his eyes, Madam Deputy Speaker. I disagreed with him profoundly on many issues, but I could never have imagined him coming along and saying we are going to legislate to break international law on an agreement we had signed less than a year earlier as a country. But that is what this bill does, Madam Deputy Speaker, in the government's own words. And I want to address 3 questions at the heart of this issue. Is it right to threaten to break the law in the way the government proposes? Is it necessary to do so? And will it help our country? The answer to each of those questions is no. Let's remember the context of this and the principle here. If there is one thing we are known for around the world, it is the rule of law. The country of the Magna Carta, the country that is known for being the mother of all parliaments, the country that out of the darkness of the Second World War helped found the United Nations. Our global reputation for rule-making, not rule-breaking, is one of the reasons we are so respected round the world. And when you ask people to think of Britain, they think of the rule of law. And let's be clear after the Prime Minister's speech, despite what he said, this is not an argument about Remain versus Leave. It is an argument about right versus wrong. The Brexiteer and former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Lord Lamont, says the bill is impossible to defend. The Brexiteer and former Attorney General, who helped negotiate and signed off this deal as Attorney General, says the bill is unconscionable. And the Brexiteer, Lord Howard, his former boss, said this: I never thought it was a thing I'd hear a British minister, far less a Conservative minister, say, which was that the government was going to invite Parliament to act in breach of international law. We have a reputation for probity, for upholding the rule of law, and it's a reputation that is very precious and ought to be safeguarded. And I'm afraid it was severely damaged by the bill. I will give way.
Does he think the EU has been negotiating in good faith?
Well, it's very interesting that the Right Honourable Gentleman should say that, because there's a report that came out from the Northern Ireland Select Committee, chaired by Conservative, today. And this is what it said. This is my answer to him. These talks began in March and continued throughout the summer in a spirit of good faith and mutual respect for the delicate arrangements in Northern Ireland. So that's what the Conservative-controlled Select Committee says about this issue. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has said many times he wants to bring unity to the country during his premiership. I therefore congratulate him on having in just one short year united his 5 predecessors. Unfortunately, their point of agreement is that he is trashing the reputation of this country and trashing the reputation of his office. And why are these 5 former Prime Ministers so united on this point? Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, they know our moral authority in the world comes from our commitment to the rule of law and keeping our word. We rightly condemn China when it rides roughshod over the treaties dictating the future of Hong Kong. We say they signed them in good faith. We say they are going back on their word. We say, Madam Deputy Speaker, they can't be trusted. And his defence? Don't worry, I can't be trusted either. And what will they say to us from now on? What will they throw back at us? That we too don't keep to international law. I give way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank the honourable member. Did the party opposite keep their word to the British voters?
Well, actually, yes, we do, and I'll tell her why. Because we respect the fact that the Conservative Party, under this Prime Minister, won the election. He got his mandate to deliver his Brexit deal. The thing he said was, and I'm sure she recalls it, it was probably on her leaflets, oven ready. It's not me that's coming along and saying it's half-baked, it's him. He's coming along and saying, the deal I signed, the deal I agreed, actually, and I'll get to this in my speech, actually, it is, what's the word? Ambiguous, problematic. I wonder whether he actually read the deal in the first place. Yes, I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way, and he's making an extremely good speech. But could he perhaps tell the House who on earth might have signed this terrible deal with so many ambiguities less than 9 months ago?
I do believe my honourable friend makes an important point. It's the Prime Minister who signed this deal. Now, I want, Madam Deputy Speaker, in fairness to the Prime Minister, I want to deal with each of the government's arguments that they've made in the last few days for this action. And it's quite hard to keep count of these different arguments. You know you're losing the argument when you keep making lots of different arguments. But I want to give the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, the top 5. Right. First, let's deal with the argument about blockades. Now, that argument, Madam Deputy Speaker, made its first outing in the Telegraph on Saturday from the Prime Minister, and obviously it made a big appearance today. I have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't like the ramping up of the rhetoric from the European Union that was on Thursday, following the Prime Minister's publication of this bill. But even by the standards of this Prime Minister, this is as ridiculous an argument as I've ever heard, even by his standards. And let me explain to him why. And the point was very well made by the former Attorney General this morning. This is what Article 16 of the protocol says. If the application of the protocol leads to serious economic, societal or environmental difficulties that are liable to persist or to diversion of trade, the Union or the United Kingdom may unilaterally take appropriate safeguard measures. In other words, let us just say that this threat somehow materialised. And by the way, I believe it's DEFRA officials who'd have to implement this threat, making it even more absurd that it would happen. Let's just say this threat materialised. It's not overturning the protocol that is the right thing to do, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's upholding the protocol because of Article 16. And don't take my word for it, Madam Deputy Speaker. Take the word of the former Attorney General, who definitely read the protocol and who wrote this morning, and I quote, "There are clear and lawful responses available to Her Majesty's government." And then, and the Prime Minister tried to slip this in, I don't know whether the House noticed, there is an irony here, which is that, as if this wasn't enough, this bill does precisely nothing to address the issue of the transport of food from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. It is about two issues where they're going to override international law. It's about exit declarations, Northern Ireland to GB, and the definition of state aid relating to Northern Ireland. Now, if the Prime Minister wants to tell us that there's another part of this bill that I haven't noticed that will deal with this supposed threat of the blockade, I'll give way to him. I'll very happily give way to him and tell me, he can tell us. I'm sure he's read it. I'm sure he knows it. I'm sure he knows it in detail because he's a details man. Come on, tell us what clause protects the threat that he says he's worried about GB to Northern Ireland exports. I give way to him.
Well, the right honourable gentleman can't give way unless he's asked to.
There you have it. He didn't read the protocol. He hasn't read the bill. He doesn't know his stuff. Right. Let's deal with the second bogus argument. Second, he claimed on Wednesday it was necessary to protect the Good Friday Agreement. That's the first outing for this was on Wednesday at Prime Minister's Questions. I have to say to him, I'd rather trust the authors of the Good Friday Agreement than the Prime Minister, who has prominent members of the government who opposed the agreement at the time. But this is what John Major and Tony Blair wrote. The bill... Oh, they don't like John Major, I know. The bill puts the Good Friday... the bill puts the Good Friday Agreement at risk because this is very serious, because it negates the predictability, the political stability and legal clarity that are integral to the delicate balance between the north and south of Ireland that is at the core of the peace process. These are very important words from two former Prime Ministers both of whom helped win us peace in Northern Ireland. And he may not want to believe them, but he will, I hope, believe himself. Because this is what he said. Maybe not. Because this is what he said about the Northern Ireland Protocol, and I quote, "There are particular circumstances in Northern Ireland at the border that deserve particular respect and sensitivity. And that is what they have received in the deal. It's a great deal for Northern Ireland." I don't understand this, Madam Deputy Speaker. He signed the deal. It's his deal. It's the deal that he said would protect the people of Northern Ireland. And I have to say to him, this is not just legislative hooliganism on any issue. It is on the most sensitive issues of all. And I think we should take the word of two former Prime Ministers of this country who helped secure peace in Northern Ireland. I will give them.
The shadow spokesman for giving way. Before he lectures the Prime Minister about reading documentation and he starts lecturing us about the Good Friday Agreement, does he recognise that, first of all, the Good Friday Agreement talks about the principle of consent, about changing the constitutional position of Northern Ireland, which this protocol does. And the Good Friday Agreement has within it a mechanism to safeguard the minorities in Northern Ireland through a cross-community vote, which again the protocol removed. So before he starts talking about the threats to the Good Friday Agreement, does he not recognise that the protocol was a threat to the Good Friday Agreement in the first place?
The honourable gentleman didn't like the protocol at all. He'd rather have not had the protocol. He and I just have a disagreement on this issue. I believe that it was necessary to make special arrangements for Northern Ireland or for the UK to be in the EU Customs Union to avoid a hard border in Ireland. Now that's why the Prime Minister came along and said the protocol was the right thing to do. Let me deal with the third excuse that we've heard, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is the "it was all a bit of a rush" excuse. Or as the Prime Minister said in his article, times were, quote, torrid and there were serious misunderstandings. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister tries to pretend this is some new issue, but they've been warned for months about the way the protocol would work. The Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, who's sitting in his place, was warned at the Select Committee in March and was asked about these issues. The Business Secretary was written to by the House of Lords Committee in April. And let's just get this straight for a minute, because I think it's important to take a step back. What the Prime Minister is coming to this House to tell us today is that his flagship achievement, the deal he told us was a triumph, the deal he said, as I said, that was oven-ready, the deal on which he fought and won the general election, is now contradictory and ambiguous. Madam Deputy Speaker, what incompetence, what failure of governance. And Madam Deputy Speaker, how dare he try and blame everyone else? Can I say to the Prime Minister, this time he can't blame the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead, he can't blame John Major, he can't blame the judges, he can't blame the civil servants, he can't sack the Cabinet Secretary again. There's only one person responsible for it, and that's him. This is his deal, it's his mess, it's his failure. For the first time in his life, it's time to take responsibility. It's time to fess up. Either he wasn't straight with the country about the deal in the first place, or he didn't understand it. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, a competent government would never have entered into a binding agreement with provisions it could not live with. And if such a government somehow missed the point but woke up later, it would have done what any competent business would do after it realises it can't live with the terms of a contract. It would negotiate a way out in good faith. And that's why, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is also unnecessary, because there is a mechanism designed for exactly this purpose in the protocol, in the agreement, the Joint Committee on the Northern Ireland Protocol. And what did the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster say on the 11th of March at the Brexit Select Committee? He was asked about the state aids issue, he'll recall that. And he said, and I quote, "The effective working of the protocol is a matter for the Joint Committee to resolve." The remaining issues to which this bill speaks aren't insignificant, but nor are they insurmountable. And that is the right way to pursue them, not an attempt at illegality. Now, let me come back to the excuses. Fourth, on Sunday, there was the Justice Secretary's the fire alarm defence. So we don't want to have to do this, but we might have to. I want to be clear with the House about something very, very important about a decision to pass this bill. And I have great respect for the Honourable Member for Bromley and Chislehurst. But I want to make this point. The very act of passing this bill is itself a breach of international law. And I think it's I think it'd be wrong for honourable and right honourable members on either side of the House to be under any illusions about this as they decide which lobby to go into tonight. If we pass this bill, even if there's a nod and a wink from the Prime Minister to the honourable member for Bromley and Chislehurst, we equip the government with the power to break the law. That in itself is a breach of the Northern Ireland Protocol and therefore a breach of international law.
Wait. I listen carefully to his formulation and understand much of what he says. However, an act passed by this House only becomes law when it comes into force. He will be right, I'd submit, to say that as soon as any of these provisions came into force, we will potentially breach international law. That is not quite the same thing, as I think he would fairly concede.
That's not a risk we are going to take, Madam Deputy Speaker. So the fire alarm defence simply doesn't work. And finally, I want to deal with the last defence, Madam Deputy Speaker. This was floated as a trial balloon, you might say, by the Northern Ireland Secretary. I believe it was last Tuesday. He said it was a breach of the law in a quote-unquote specific and limited way. Madam Deputy Speaker, this really is a new way of thinking about legal questions. It now turns out that breaking the law specifically and in a limited way is a reasonable defence for this government. We've all heard of self-defence, the alibi defence, the innocence defence. Now we have the Johnson defence. You can break the law, but in a specific and limited way. And Madam Deputy Speaker, think about the current grave context we face. The Home Secretary, out today in the newspapers, warning everyone, you must abide by the law. By the way, on this, the Home Secretary is absolutely right. And she says this: I know that as part of our national effort, the law-abiding majority will stick to these new rules, but there will be a small minority who do not. You couldn't make it up, Madam Deputy Speaker. What she didn't say in this article, but what we now know about this government, is that the Johnson defence means something very specific. There is one rule for the British public and another rule for this government. Pioneered by Cummings, implemented by Johnson. That is the Johnson rule. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is the wrong thing to do. It is not necessary, and it is also deeply damaging for the country. Let's just think about this in terms of the impact on our country in the negotiations. The government's hope is that this will make a deal more likely. But that relies on the notion that reneging on a deal we made less than a year ago with the party we are negotiating with will make them more likely to trust us, not less. If I think about our everyday lives, and if we think about an agreement we made a year ago with somebody, and we were seeking to have another negotiation with them, and we came along and unilaterally reneged on the first deal we made, would it make them more likely to trust us or less likely to trust us? Obviously, it would make them less likely to trust us. And we know the risks. I very much hope the Prime Minister gets a deal. We absolutely need a deal as a country. We know the risks of a no-deal strategy, of no deal if this strategy goes wrong. The Prime Minister said last week that no deal is somehow, quote-unquote, a good outcome. He's wrong. I hear from businesses all the time, and I'm sure the business secretary who's sitting in his place does too, who are deeply worried about the danger of no deal. I know what he thinks about their views because of his famous four-letter rant, but this is what they have to say. Nissan says there could be no guarantee about its Sunderland plant if there were tariffs on UK to EU trade. Ford have said no deal will be disastrous. The NFU say it will be catastrophic for British farming. Indeed, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, when he was in the job as DEFRA Secretary, said the same thing. We're in the biggest economic crisis for 300 years, the biggest public health crisis for 100 years. No deal is not some game. It's about the livelihoods of millions of people across our country. And what about the prize trade deal with the United States? I know the Prime Minister thinks he has a friend in President Trump, but even he must recognise he must be able to deal with both sides. This is what the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, said. The UK must respect the Northern Ireland Protocol as signed with the EU. If the UK violates that international treaty and Brexit undermines the Good Friday Accord, there'll be absolutely no chance of a US-UK trade agreement passing the Congress. This is the signal we're sending to our friends and allies around the world. The country known for the rule of law, the country that abides by the law, the country that founded international law. This is the signal we are sending. Madam Deputy Speaker, that's why we cannot support this bill, and we will oppose it tonight. The government must go back, remove the sections breaking international law, ensure the bill works in a way that respects the devolution settlements. That's what a responsible, competent and law-abiding government would do. This is a pivotal moment in determining the future of our country, who we are and how we operate. In shaping that future, we have to stand up for the traditions that matter, our commitment to the rule of law. This bill speaks of a government, a Prime Minister that is casual, not to say cavalier, and reckless about the gravity of the issues he confronts. He should be focusing on securing a Brexit deal, not breaking international law and risking no deal. He is cavalier on international law. He is cavalier on our traditions. This is not the serious leadership we need. That's why we will oppose this bill tonight.
The original question was that the bill be now read a second time since when an amendment has been proposed as on the order paper. The question is that the amendment be made. And before I call the chairman of the Select Committee, I should draw to the attention of the House that 101 members are hoping to catch my eye from the back benches. It won't be possible to call everyone, but in order to try to allow as many people as possible to participate in such an important debate, we will have a time limit with immediate effect of 4 minutes. Sir William Cash.
Madam Speaker, what would be unconscionable would for us to have left the EU lawfully, which the EU has accepted, and then allow them to threaten us and to strangle our jobs and businesses by imposing unfair state aid rules which go much wider than traditional subsidies, and then for them to